Good morning, everyone, and welcome to 3Fox Presents SCAPE. This is the fourth and final episode in the series called A Better Way, and today's session is titled Driving Better Procurement and Preparing for the Construction Playbook. My name's Toby Fox. I'm the Managing Director of 3Fox, the marketing agency for councils, and our job is to keep our network of councils and developers and investors and their influencers and advisors connected. And one way we've been doing that is through this channel, 3Fox Presents, a platform for our network across the development community to discuss challenges and issues. Now, one of those challenges is presented by the Construction Playbook, which comes into force in January next year. Now, research by Waits indicates that only 51% of local authorities are aware of the Construction Playbook, and even those are generally aware only at a low level. So you're going to hear a little bit more about that research during this session. But meanwhile, we've got a little poll now for you to test that finding. So while you're answering this poll, let me just say that this series of webinars with SCAPE aims to raise those awareness levels and look at how and if the Construction Playbook can help deliver better outcomes from construction and development, and provide some practical help on how its guidance can be implemented. And to do that, we've assembled for you a crack panel to provide you with a wide spectrum of insights. And it's a pleasure to welcome today, in alphabetical order, Julia Gregory, the Director of Projects at Ebbsfleet Development Corporation, and Andrew Riggs, the Head of Government Sector at Waits, and Mark Robinson, the Group Chief Executive at SCAPE, and Sandra Roebuck, the Director of Infrastructure and Capital Delivery at the London Borough of Lambeth. Now, we're going to spend the next hour discussing some of the key policy areas in the playbook and how they can deliver better procurement. We're going to be looking at delivery model assessments and risk allocation, at effective contracting, and at resolution planning and assessing the economic and financial standing of suppliers. We're also going to be looking a bit more widely at how the Construction Playbook is driving change in different organisations and how the recent National Procurement Policy Statement relates to the playbook. And we want you to join this conversation, viewers, so make use of the Q&A function to fire in your questions and vote for questions to fuel the discussion. Bear in mind that the more concise your question, the more likely we are to be able to pick it up. And if you'd like to share more extensive thoughts with our panel and viewers, then please do make use of the chat function. And we've got a few more surveys for you as well, so you can contribute to the conversation by responding to those when they pop up on your screens. But before we do any of that, let's introduce the Construction Playbook. What is it? It's a government guidance document about sourcing and contracting public works projects, launched by Cabinet Office in December 2020 and coming into force in January 2022. It was developed with the Construction Leadership Council, and it sets out the government's expectations of how contracting authorities and suppliers, including the supply chain, should engage with each other. And it does that through 14 key policies for assessing, procuring and delivering public works projects and programmes. So that's the bare bones of it. And it looks like 36% of our audience are aware of the Construction Playbook, but 44% aren't, and 20% aren't sure. So we're in a good place to be explaining some of this panel. Your wisdom and insight is going to be really useful today. So let's find out what the Construction Playbook means to our panel. Julia, do you want to kick us off? What are the implications of the playbook for the Ebbsfleet Development Corporation?
Yeah, so Ebbsfleet is an arm's length body to government. So that means there's a term called in scope, I think is the term. So as an organisation, we are in scope for compliance for all of the documents that are coming out from government. I think beyond that, I think the Construction Playbook for the project management team that I manage, it's actually a really good structure to make sure that when we're developing our business cases, or even at project brief level, that we've covered every aspect. And I am hoping in the future it will mean that our business cases will actually go through more quickly.
Fantastic. So, thanks, Julia. Sandra, how does that resonate with you in Lambeth? What does the playbook mean for you as a local authority?
For us, our 5-year capital programme is to the value of about £400 million. Last year, we completed 66% of that on track, despite being delayed due to COVID. I think the Construction Playbook is one of the first times we've ever seen all of the issues kind of come together in one document to have this kind of dialogue, and I think that's really important. Key elements of it for us are the supply chain, social value aspects, value for money, contract management, a discussion about risk and delivery. Those are all things that factor into our consideration of our kind of project base. And I should say our 400 million doesn't include our regeneration projects or our housing company. So we consider ourselves to be quite a big player in the local authority marketplace, procuring development and contractors. So the playbook, I think, is a good first step in having a more rounded dialogue about the challenges that we all face.
Thanks, Sandra. What about from the supply side? Andrew, what does the playbook mean to Waits?
Well, firstly, for me, it's quite a personal journey. I think I've clocked up something like 18 hours of industry forum and workshops in getting involved with helping to shape the playbook. So quite personal for me. And I don't know about everybody else, but I've been in this industry for 30 years and had numerous reports and strategic intents done to me. So it's absolutely refreshing that we are creating something collaboratively between the public and the private sector. So for the first time, I think this has got not only all of the issues that we need to resolve, but we're doing it together collaboratively. So what this means for us, Waits, and for me personally, is being able to make a contribution to that and influence it and work with clients for a better end.
Fantastic, Andrew. That's a really positive start. And Mark, what about from the framework's point of view, from SCAPE's point of view?
Yeah, I mean, as well as SCAPE, but also our clients and partners, it's an opportunity for us to contribute to the government's agenda around building back greener, faster public works. I mean, the construction playbook is a key pillar of Project Speed, which is really important in terms of trying to get the economic recovery post-COVID. And we've got an opportunity to do that with a construction playbook. And it also brings around best practice. And for people that have seen me before, I always talk about the 3 basic rules of procurement in terms of getting your brief right, reviewing your procurement options, and obviously getting your supply chain, your delivery partners and your professional consultants involved at the earliest possible stage. And that gives the best chance of success.
Great stuff, Mark. Thanks very much. So you mentioned Project Speed and the sort of green infrastructure priorities of the government. There is a real kind of direction of travel here, isn't there? And the construction playbook fits into that direction of travel. And that was illustrated by the National Procurement Policy Statement that came out recently, a couple of weeks ago, I think. Can you tell us a little bit, panel, about how that statement relates to the playbook and the sort of procurement green paper and general direction of travel from government? Julia, do you want to kick us off on that?
Yeah, so obviously the NPPF is if you want, the overriding document, and it's also got a load of policy notes that sit underneath it, which are equally as important. And then for us, we're going to have a series of playbooks underneath which cover a range of issues. So I guess that's the relationship. So it shouldn't be seen in isolation. It's actually part of an overall improvement, if you want, of project delivery and capital delivery. And
the fact that there are so many sort of elements that kind of slot in side by side, that gives you a sort of sense that they mean it.
Yeah, so it's very much the terminology is compliance or explain. So that's the terminology. So I would think that anybody who is putting forward bids into, for example, the housing funds or any of the transport funds, they will be required to actually demonstrate compliance all the way through. So
yeah, great stuff. Thanks a lot, Julia. Sandra, do you want to pick up on what Julia said and give us sort of your take on the statement?
Yeah, I think overall, there's a huge expectation of the capital and infrastructure industry to keep the economy moving, particularly in the light of last year, the pandemic that we're still responding to. And I think this move by government is not only around how we can better improve our performance around infrastructure delivery, but also the wider economic objective of I hate to use the word kickstart, but pushing forward the economy, as well as improving the quality of living, essentially, in some of our big cities, and challenging, meeting the housing crisis. So I think all these documents is probably not a surprise they're all coming together at this time, because the infrastructure industry is seen as, I think, the bedrock to economic recovery.
Yeah, thanks for that observation. Also, this sort of fits in with local authority objectives around sort of social value and trying to make sure that there's a more positive impact for local people from development and construction. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're also trying we're trying to measure that impact as well. I think that it goes back to that join up approach, which, you know, we're trying to measure the value of the construction pound through our economy and through the quality of life of our residents, and ensuring the social value aspects are particularly important to that, because I don't think we really recognise that sufficiently in the industry as a key outcome of development and infrastructure that takes place. So the social value aspects are critical, also in the context of an economy, you know, our own financial situation as the public sector. It's really important that for every pound we put in, we get as much multiplier impact as we possibly can back.
Yeah, Julia, we'll come to you in a second because I know you want to come in on this. But Sandra, you mentioned when we were talking about this earlier, you mentioned the idea of corporate parenting within your procurement process. That's something that you're already introducing, isn't it?
Yes, so each of our decisions has a requirement around all these aspects in terms of social value and corporate parenting. So we have a responsibility to our care leavers and our young people who are coming out of care to help them find opportunities for housing, for work, for social interaction, for all these aspects. So every decision that we make actually requires us as officers to make a statement about that in terms of the decision that we're making. And I think it goes beyond the traditional Section 106 obligations of a planning application around employment and skills and apprentices. Yes, of course we want those. Of course those are essential, but we've really got to bridge the gap for these young people to get them into opportunities that, even in a borough like Lambeth, where the growth agenda is still thriving, there is a long way to go. And our corporate parenting responsibility is right at the top of the agenda. In terms of Lambeth as an organisation, and obviously our political colleagues. One of the key reasons for that is we don't want to see a growing gap between those young people and some of our residents and the sort of higher earners, creating a differential. We want to see an equal community with equal opportunity and equal outcomes and benefits.
Yeah.
We also, of course, want the industry to have its opportunity to create wealth as well. It's not a one-sided coin. Clearly, if we don't have a good relationship with our partners and they don't secure their necessary profit and return, all the things that are talked about in the Construction Playbook, you know, are probably going to be more and more difficult to achieve. So it has got to be a common understanding.
Great stuff. We'll see what the private sector thinks any second now. But Julia, was there something you just wanted to pick up on?
Yeah, I was going to pick up on the fact that some of the points that Sandra said, but I think there's a really clear policy message coming from government in not only the national policy framework for procurement, but also the Construction Playbook, is that government wants to only invest its money in companies and organisations and projects which demonstrate social value and almost the carbon and climate change agenda. So I think if you actually delve into those, you know, the procurement framework and the documents that sit alongside it, and then the Construction Playbook, there's clearly a policy agenda there to link to the kickstarting economy, and that's how we're going to invest our money. So I think there's a real need for everyone to take note of that about how you move forward in demonstrating it.
Great stuff. Thanks, Julia. So Andrew, the NPP, the National Procurement Policy Statement a couple of weeks ago, how are you seeing that sort of playing into this kind of general direction of travel from government? Are you getting the indication from all of this that this is serious and that things really are changing?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to echo what Julia and Sandra said, it's all starting to feel a bit more joined up, or as joined up as it can be. I think the other thing I would say as well, to add to what they've said, is I'm sure there's plenty of people out there saying, hang on a minute, we're already doing a lot of this stuff. And in some respects, this is a little bit of government policy catching up with industry best practice that's already there. So we shouldn't forget that lots of good things around social value, lots of good things around trying to tackle the climate crisis, skills agenda, all of these things are already happening out there. So you could argue that policy is catching up with some of the best practice that some of the listeners are probably already pretty aware of.
That's a fair point. And wait, at SCAPE, you've been at the forefront of all of that, Mark, haven't you? I mean, would you echo Andrew's thoughts?
Yeah, I think the panel's thoughts are really, really positive around it, and I welcome the statement because it raises the profile of procurement. I've spent the majority of my career trying to raise the profile of a subject that is not entirely sexy in some people's eyes. So procurement is a dry subject sometimes, but it is really important. The government spends £290 billion on third-party goods and services. Of that, 37 billion is construction related. So it is really important that we try and get it right. And there is opportunities there around social value and climate change, but there's also things in there in the statement around commercial and procurement delivery and skills and capabilities. And skills and capabilities is really important, particularly from a procurement point of view. We do struggle in the public sector to get real good quality procurement resources and commercial resources for that matter. So it's really important that we invest in that in the future.
Yeah, that's good stuff. We've got a question in here from Steve Smith that I think is worth answering, Mark. He's asking, does the playbook impact on the procurement of professional services, if at all?
Yeah, well, there is a playbook specifically around consultancy as well. So it does, but the construction playbook, when you talk around getting that proper support for clients and that professional support that they need, then consultancy services are really key for that, because they will not necessarily have that knowledge and skills in-house anymore. So they've got to rely on our professional colleagues, if you like, in the consultants, to enable them to deliver them projects and programs.
Great stuff. Thanks, Mark, and thanks, Steve. Sandra, you wanted to just make a point before we move on to look at some of these key policy areas with Julia.
Yeah, I think one of the really good parts of the playbook suite is this emphasis on early dialogue and early conversations, because I mean, I think one of the things that procurement suffers from is the idea of a very long process that is very expensive and only one winner at the end. And I think that's created quite a lot of problems for the industry. And I think this early dialogue idea and getting everybody's shared understanding of values and outcomes is one of the really critical things that actually is quite new. I think the employment and skills and some of those traditional things have been ongoing, but I do think that understanding of outcomes is quite new language for government.
Great stuff. Thanks, Sandra. Okay, we're asking the audience now whether, from what they've heard so far, they feel that the playbook is going to help them deliver better outcomes. And while the audience deals with that, let's move on to Julia and the first key policy area we're going to look at today, which is delivery model assessments and risk allocation. Julia, do you want to just talk us through how you're looking at that policy area?
Yeah, so if you bear in mind that the environment I work in is complex projects which are being delivered as a result of market failure. So basically the conditions aren't there in the market for the private sector to bring it forward. That means that anything I look at has a very high level of risk. And therefore, if you look at your assessment of delivery model, it's actually very, very profound, and it's something that you actually need to do from my point of view at the earliest stage, because when I then look at risk, which is the one thing that actually for me determines one of the prime determinants about how you will bring that project forward, it's really important to look at the market and find the best solution, one which is suitable for the project you're doing and it's suitable for the risk. And I would also say it's suitable for the organisation that you work in. We will look at the risk appetite of our organisation as well, which I think is relatively new within the market, but if organisations don't understand their risk appetite, that will change the delivery model that they then look at. And it's something that I look at the very earliest stages of a project, and very much determine at that stage in terms of how we are. And also I will look at different delivery models at different points to manage that risk as well. So if we've got a very long-term project which might be being delivered over 10 years, we might have a number of delivery models at different stages. Or I might manage the risk, for example, using the SCAPE framework by doing pre-construction contracts separate to a construction contract. So I only risk a small amount of money until I actually find what the real issues are by doing some ground investigation or pre-con work. And then that enables the risk to diminish before you commit a very large sum of money. So you've got contracts like that where it's applicable to do those kind of things.
Great stuff. Thanks, Julia. Sandra, how are you looking at delivery model assessments and risk allocation, and how the construction playbook is sort of guiding us on that?
So, I mean, risk is critical to obviously the public sector. I was looking at all the delivery model suggestions in the playbook earlier today, actually, and thinking about all the things that we've got ongoing, and we probably are covering all of them in one way or another in terms of different types of delivery, because obviously it does depend, as Julia says, on the product that you're trying to secure and the stage that you're at. The question of risk is really important to Lambeth Council, not only as a commissioner of infrastructure, but of course we also have our own housing company. So we are doing direct delivery. I think one of the challenges we have is the way our budgets are allocated. They're allocated quite early on in the process in order for a project to progress. So managing risk in that context is quite difficult if during the process of construction something changes and costs go up. So risk is a really, really critical part for us. And I will say that sometimes, certainly Lambeth is prepared to take that risk. That is why we created a housing company, because we were prepared to take some of that risk on board. So it's not always a case of transferring it across. Where we have some very complex town centre projects that involve a lot of third parties, particular rail industry, for example, we often try and transfer the risk. But I guess the key thing I wanted to say is that we do think about it very closely, and it's becoming much more important in our determination of whether or not we go ahead with a project.
Thanks, Sandra.
So you will see risk right up there as one of the criteria that our members want to explore too, actually.
Yeah, and there, of course, there are different kinds of risk, aren't there? I mean, there's the political risk around housing companies has been made really clear and evident with events at some local housing companies over the past few months, and we're going to be dealing with that on the Voice of Authority next week on the 8th of July. And if you tune into that, viewers, at 11 a.m. Next Thursday, that's the politics of direct delivery, and we'll welcome you there. But first, Andrew and panel, you've done a really good job. 67% of our viewers are looking at the construction playbook positively, even though more than half of them weren't aware of it before we started this session. So good job so far. Andrew, I think you wanted to pick up on something that came earlier, and also if you could give us a sort of an insight into your views on the the DMAs and that sort of key policy area.
Yeah, just on the DMA and the risk question, what I wanted to say really was they're not disconnected, because the delivery model assessments, if you can get good trusted advisor in early enough to give you de-risking advice, then you're mitigating the other. So that they go hand in hand, and frameworks like SCAPE's framework, where we get the opportunity to respond to a good client brief with a good feasibility that looks at all the risks, that's when you get better outcomes. So you can't disconnect the two. It's much better to take the risk out during design and planning than it is to have to mitigate it later on. And I think that was just the point from a contracting point of view that I wanted to say.
Yeah, we got a question in here from David Hutt viewing, and he's asking if risk data capture and project control should be made open source on all large projects. How do you respond to that?
That's a difficult question, because generally speaking, the best way to deal with risk is have your risk register sitting alongside your cost plan and properly and managing the two together. So it's very much a sort of commercially sensitive area on major projects, because what you really want is the whole team working collaboratively to drive both of them down. So it's an interesting question, but I think that might be quite tricky. I think perhaps what we can be doing is providing a little bit more transparency at the end of projects about outturn and how it was managed, so that people can learn from the successful best practice. I think there's no reason why we couldn't do that.
Thanks, Andrew. Mark, we'll come to you just in a second, but Sandra, you wanted to make a point. And actually, I'd also like to put to you, Sandra, another question from the audience, which is around how the playbook doesn't address the BAME community directly at all, and how the panel sort of going to ensure the involvement of the BAME community and that they're not excluded from the delivery process.
Yeah, I think just on the risk side, colleagues won't be surprised to hear that we're frequently the subject of FOIs on projects and risk and finances. And as Andrew says, during the course of a project, quite often there are commercial sensitivities, particularly where we have third parties, where we're not able to release that information. But certainly post-completion, we usually issue all of our information around finance and risk where we have agreement, or we've put ourselves in a place that we're able to. We would try and release as much under FOI as we possibly can, as long as it's not commercially sensitive, in the interest of being open and transparent. In terms of the BAME community, I mean, certainly as a council, we've got a huge driver now around diversity in all of our policy and delivery areas. Actually, it's a really important sort of plank of the council's business in terms of going forward. And I do think there are more and more opportunities to address those issues, which perhaps hitherto seem to have been too distant. I know my own organisation is a much more diverse organisation than it was, certainly in the sort of senior management tiers, because we've actually set out a strategy and a policy to do that. So I think if you have a policy or a strategy or an action plan to address that issue, you are able to do it, subject to all of the things like normal issues around skills and availability of workforce. I mean, I think availability of workforce is probably one of the key challenges for that
absolutely
area.
I'm sure
finding the individuals is a key challenge.
Yeah, Mark touched on that earlier, and presumably this idea of sort of enforcing a measurement and understanding of social value, the impact of social value. There's a certain freedom for you in deciding what that social value actually is. So you can play all sorts of elements locally into that assessments of social value.
Yeah, and one of the things that we've done is we don't always look at social value from the point of view of goods and services. I mean, our current contracts do take it as a financial contribution, so that we as an authority can then make those decisions according to our local circumstance. So we have already negotiated on our waste and highways contract a 1% revenue contribution that will create a really good social value fund for us, that then we can then engage with residents on how they would like to see social value realised within the context of our authority and what it means to them, not just what we think are our priorities, but what they think is important in terms of that. So there are ways and means of delivering it that you can then reflect local need much more closely.
Great stuff, Sandra. Thanks. Mark, you're our host today. You've been waiting very patiently on this round, and we've got a feast for you. Lots of threads. We've got the issue of diversity and how the Construction Playbook affects that, if indeed it does. It doesn't seem to address it directly. Open source data and the original conversation around this policy area of risk and DMAs.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of diversity, we do build into all our arrangements contract commitments in terms of measuring and making sure that our delivery partners on every project contribute to that. And that could be anything from employing a diverse workforce to things like women in construction, which is a really important agenda. So we actually encourage our partners to deliver that through the life of our arrangements, which is sometimes 4 to 6 years long. So you're able to do that. In terms of risk and delivery models and stuff, I think that, again, it's really important that you understand the clients and their appetite for risks. We have got clients that are very risk averse, and we've got some clients that are willing to take risks. And I think you've got to try and understand that as you move through. But we've developed a SCAPE process over the last 15 years that enables them to manage that risk through the delivery of a programme or project. And we say to our clients, although it's not mandated, we say follow that SCAPE process, you will get better outcomes at the end.
Fantastic, thanks very much. And that question of open source data, do you want to address that at all?
Yeah, I mean, it's very difficult because obviously there is commercial sensitivities with some data, but I'm all for sharing data where it's appropriate, and I think that we should encourage people to share more data. I mean, we share data with the National Association of Construction Frameworks, we share it with central government departments, and I think it's really important that we do that, because it enables them to ultimately have a positive effect on construction delivery and infrastructure delivery across the public sector.
Great, thanks, Mark. We'll leave that one there. Let's move on to key policy area 2 for today. Effective contracting. Sandra and then Julia. What do you understand by effective contracting, and how do you think this kind of policy is going to influence the way that you procure?
So we have just introduced a whole sort of new area of contract management because we recognised it was one of our biggest failings. I think what we've sort of seen is that the team that is negotiating the contract up front is not always the team who's in the delivery seat after the contract has been signed, and it very rarely is the team who's in the looking after it seat after the project's been finished. So I think we recognise that our contract management has needed to be strengthened, and we have put in place a kind of process for that. And I do think that's a really important thing to come out of the Construction Playbook series, the idea that there's a focus on procurement, but then you only realise the best out of a contract if you manage it in a professional way on all sides. And then I think also there is also a section on the sort of resolution side of things, and I think that is the worst outcome of a contract, is that where you are in a dispute situation, but nevertheless sometimes those things happen, and proper arrangements for that conversation also need to be had. So we're very in support of a push to the public sector to contract manage better.
Yeah, there's this interesting thing, isn't there? And I guess in some public sector organisations, I don't know how generalised we can be on this, where once the contract is kind of signed, it moves away from all the people who've got the expertise in putting it together into other teams who maybe don't have the same interest in measuring those KPIs, or maybe don't have the same sort of skills or resources in order to oversee that contract properly.
I think certainly there is a knowledge base that needs to be accumulated over the course of a project. I have the pleasure of having been at Lambeth for sort of 11 years. So we've built leisure centres, we built the Northern Line extension, we built schools, we built your new town hall. You know, during that period, an awful lot has happened. And I'm quite often the common thread that gets the phone call to say, we found this bit of the contract, what did it mean? So unfortunately, I'm there to explain some of it. But that, I guess what I'm trying to get across is that corporate knowledge needs to be clearly collected, lessons learned, passed on to colleagues throughout the sort of process. And we shouldn't really be shy of learning the lessons, I don't think. I think one of the best meetings I had with a contractor over the period I've been here was that the end of the contract, well, you know, what were the weaknesses in this for both of us, and why are we, you know, what could we have done better? And that lesson learning was really, really valuable. I will say also, we're not trying to create contracts that penalise. We, as a public sector, want to incentivise. We want a project finished on time and on budget. It makes no real pleasure for us to end up with a contract that has failed and we're in the courts penalising. It's all about outcome delivery, on time, on budget, and in a professional manner that serves our residents. The sort of end of the process is not really success for us, even though we might build a contract that makes that provision.
Yeah, thanks, Sandra. Julia, how does the sort of situation for a development corporation differ, and how are you looking at Construction Playbook guidance on contract management?
I would say it's actually no different, because it is about getting the outcome that you want and actually getting value for money. So that, I guess that's no different. I would say you have to put in as much effort to getting the right contract and contract management as you do procurement. And you need to start it early, as well as involve the actual person who's going to be delivering that contract on site. So for me, the client side PM who would be on site. I guess the other thing for me around the kind of contract management side, it does all come down to relationships. And I'm a really strong advocate of putting my client team down with the main contractor. I think anyone on the larger projects, anyone who thinks it doesn't pay for itself, it does pay for itself in terms of relationship. Any claims that you may get, things are resolved much more quickly. And as long as you've got the right behaviours from both parties, I think you've absolutely got a winning combination there. So I'm really strong advocate of doing that.
Julia, what do you mean when you say large project? How would you define a larger project?
For me, I could see it absolutely paying for itself of anything over probably 5 to 10 million. Yeah. I would see you can. Otherwise, you might have shared project management staff who might move around from project to project, but I would still expect to see the emphasis being on co-location, and that comes down to the relationship that you have right the way through the organisation, from the guys who are on site, or the team who are on site, right the way through to the exec level. I would expect there to be contract management happening at the highest level, and I think then you get an open relationship and you get no surprises.
No surprises. Yeah.
That's the key for me, is no surprises, because if something has happened, for me, on both sides, honesty is the key way, because you can then manage that risk and manage it together. And I think that's a much better way, and of dealing with contract management.
That all sounds very laudable. And Andrew, what's the art of the possible there? I mean, honesty is the best policy, but it's not always present, right? So what's the art of the possible there? And does the Construction Playbook help you achieve it? And I'm guessing contracts are just as important from the private sector's point of view as they are from the public sector.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing to say is the good news is we both want the same thing: projects on time, on budget, with a great impact on a community. So that's the good thing. So what we both want, I guess, as well, is those sort of simple procurements that engage us early so that we can influence that. Contracts that encourage collaboration and those right behaviours that Julia talked about. So I can't disagree with anything anyone said. We want exactly those same things. So you have to ask yourself why that goes wrong sometimes. And because at the end of the day, it's not about the contract, it's about the behaviour of the parties, which makes things go wrong. So, but what you can do is set up the environment for success in terms of choosing good contracts and good procurement routes. So when you're using frameworks like SCAPE, for example, you're getting involved early and you're influencing all of the aspects of a project right from the get-go, you get much better outcomes. I think Mark said that. And when you're using forms of contracts on these frameworks that encourage collaboration, you get better behaviours. So all of those things are important.
Yeah, would you agree with that?
The good news is we want the same things.
Absolutely, Mark. Would you agree with that? And we want the same things when everything's right. Yeah, but we're talking about what happens in the unfortunate and perhaps unlikely circumstance where things are going wrong. So Mark, how do you see that sort of effective contract management piece in the Construction Playbook?
I mean, I'm really agreeing with the panel, but I mean, as far as we're concerned, we act as an enabler to enable them to have them long-term relationships. So when things go wrong, it is really important that them relationships are developed, and it's not just for a one-off project. And that's what SCAPE encourages, because when there is project problems and issues, then you're able to talk to one another in a frank and open way to enable them to be resolved. I think also the form of contract, although I don't think we should necessarily rely on the contract, the form of contracts. I think the relationships come first, but the collaborative form of contract that we use enables that to be, if you like, diffused before it becomes a bigger problem. So it encourages that collaborative approach, which is always useful, particularly if there's problems.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is interesting, isn't it? We talk about these things as sort of systems and rules and governance and so on, but actually it's about people and relationships as much as anything else. And Julia pointed that out with the importance of seconding people into teams. Sandra, you wanted to pick up on something.
I mean, a lot of my clients quite often are colleagues within the council, and I those clients are not experts in construction. They expect my team in the Capital Studio, which we just set up exactly to try and address this challenge, to provide that expertise and knowledge. And I think one of those conflicts happens when expectations on either side are not clear about the level of knowledge needed to make decisions, and the level of knowledge around the actual contract itself. So I do think there is a lot of merit in the understanding that the client isn't always the expert in these matters. They may have a brief and a set of outcomes, but that doesn't mean to say they then understand the journey to getting to those outcomes. And the contractor or the development partner is a really essential part of that relationship. And that's why, as colleagues have said, behaviours and relationships are really important, because nobody wants to fail, do they?
No, absolutely.
Nobody wants to fail in this relationship. We want it to be success, and what success looks like is a good question to ask at the inception meeting, I think.
And it came out in the last session that we did that someone mentioned that 95% of a contractor's of the work that's being done is being done by the contractor's supply chain, and getting access to that supply chain and their knowledge and their experience by interacting with them at a really early stage is going to be a real vital part of what the Construction Playbook is encouraging and enabling. Let's move on to key policy area 3 for today, and it's a neat segue. We've already touched on this: resolution planning and assessing the economic and financial standing of suppliers. Julia, do you want to make a few comments on that and the Construction Playbook's approach to it?
Yeah, so in terms of resolution planning, I think it kind of goes back to the previous point, which is about if you've got the right behaviours set up in the contract, you shouldn't get to a stage where you need to go through that resolution planning, because actually you should have a strong enough contract in place to actually manage it. I think for me, I have seen instances of where the contracting side, if you want, their client project manager has actually refused to go to meetings to discuss actually trying to resolve something. And when you've got that level of behavior, you've got to move on from that, because it doesn't help anyone in terms of what's gone on. So I think that's the first thing in terms of resolution planning. The second item, which is about economic and financial standing, I think everyone knows that a number of people got very heavily impacted by Carillion. I think there's a whole set of measures that have been put in place across organisations. Certainly we talk to local authorities and they're looking at their exposure all the time, about how much capital and revenue exposure they have. There are all kinds of mechanisms now, because as I say, I'm in an arm's length body to government. Every week I get a supplier update for strategic suppliers across government, which is monitoring performance all the time. It is something that I do look at. Quite often we don't look at emails, but it's also the checks you do at that very early stage when you're doing early market engagement as well.
Yeah, great stuff. Thanks. Yeah. Thanks, Julia. Good advice. Sandra, looking at this issue of assessing the financial standing of suppliers, and that there is a tension, isn't there, between your wish to employ more and more local and small businesses and the need for them to measure up financially to the standards you're setting. So do you want to say a little bit about that and how the Construction Playbook sort of looks at this whole area from your point of view?
Yeah, so our supply chain is really important. I mean, Lambeth, as I'm sure a lot of other authorities are, we are a borough of entrepreneurs. I think we've probably got the greatest growth rate in small businesses compared to quite a lot of other authorities, certainly in London and across the UK. So our small businesses are really a critical part of our economic fabric. So we're very anxious to ensure that they have the opportunity to bid for contracts. That of itself, of course, doesn't give them an exclusive position. They still need to demonstrate financial standing and economic robustness. So being local and being small in the supply chain isn't a sort of free pass to getting into an awarded contract. Those financial requirements still have to be met. I think what we do recognise, though, is that some of those small businesses don't have the infrastructure, administration infrastructure, to be able to get to those places. So we do try and provide as much support around that as possible. I mean, one of the benefits, of course, of having a sort of local supply chain is that they obviously are very local to the borough and very close to the borough and very directly involved in the borough, as opposed to being sort of third party remote with no connection at all. So I think that is a benefit. But undoubtedly, the supply chain is really important to us, but we still do want companies to have financial standing, because our overall objective is to grow the economy and grow our workforce and our employment opportunities. So if those things don't come as a complete package, it doesn't really meet our objectives. But it's very important supply chain. We've had a couple of examples where Vauxhall Nine Elms, huge regeneration program with Wands with Colleagues, has a very strong supply chain network, and of course Carillion were quite involved in some of that before their demise. Our South Bank Place project, led by Braben and the Canary Wharf Group, had a really strong supply chain network. I think they'd let something like 60 or 70 million pounds of contracts to businesses locally for that huge development. So it is a really important part of the local economy. I think we also recognise there's an upskilling to be done as well. We want small, medium businesses to grow into big, thriving businesses. So there's an upskilling through this process that we probably all have a responsibility for as well. I have been in a situation where we've had main contractors and the supply chain's been quite remote to the council, and we found ourselves having a supply chain failure, which has been quite devastating on the final outcome of a project, which of course is a risk that we do all need to manage.
Yeah, absolutely, Sandra. Thanks. Andrew, so from the private sector on this issue of assessing the financial standing of suppliers, presumably it can go the wrong way as well. You can have too many requirements.
Well, I mean, absolutely, we need to have those sort of minimum standards, and we need to make sure that we're testing the viability of us, both during procurement and contracts. All I would say really is a plea just to make it appropriate to the sort of procurement that we're looking at and not overburdensome. So particularly around things like bonding and other things that can be quite expensive in the market and maybe not be necessary. So, but one thing I would want to say is about the, it was mentioned earlier about 80% often is of our delivery is the supply chain. And a huge chunk of that is SMEs, local businesses. So holding us to account on prompt payment to our SMEs, driving spend with social enterprises locally in a borough, all of those things are just as important. And when we're working on major frameworks, we're held to account on those local spends and some pretty robust targets. I think that's absolutely right. Both around SMEs, social enterprise spend, and localism. So I think we fully support that. One of the things that you have to remember is that we're a business of 4,000 people that live in these communities, are residents of these communities, use these leisure centres, use the facilities. So they care too.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, actually. Thanks. Mark, I guess it's not about understanding the financial standing of a supplier in a snapshot at a single time. You've got to be sort of fairly rigorous about this over a period of time, haven't you? And as a framework, are you investigating all of your partners on a regular basis?
Yeah. I mean, we do put a big effort in at the beginning of the procurement process to make sure we engage with partners in terms of their financial stability, but also as a big part of that assessment is around how they manage the supply chain, and that could be anything from health and safety to the financial stability of them companies. So it is really important at the beginning, but obviously after then we have monthly checks on our major partners, and we're making sure that they are still obviously in a healthy financial position to deliver projects, because some of our projects are hundreds of millions of pounds in value. They can last over a period of years, and we've got to make sure that they're in a position to deliver.
Fantastic. Thanks, Mark. Okay, we're going to move on now to have a look at the sort of slightly wider, broader implications of the construction playbook and how it's driving change in your organisation's panel. and kind of how far on the journey you've got, I guess, is one way of putting it. And I've asked the audience that same question, and it seems that that 42% feel that they're somewhat aligned compared to 44% who are very aligned, and there's still 15% not very aligned or unsure. So there's still quite a lot of uncertainty out there, given what you've been saying about some of those key policy areas. So Sandra, let's have a quick chat about how the Construction Playbook is driving change in Lambeth and how far on the journey you've got.
So I would say we're somewhat aligned. I think given the comments that I've made, I couldn't possibly say we're completely aligned with the playbook. I think we are somewhat aligned to that. We certainly recognise some of the key themes and messages and how those can be improved. I don't usually get through one of these webinars, Toby, without the use of the word innovation, and I haven't managed it yet. So with 9 minutes to go, I'm going to do a plug for innovation. I mean, I really do think we are pushing and striving for innovation in everything that we procure. We've just allocated £17 million for digital innovation, and we are really looking for the industry to bring that innovation to us. And I think that's one of the critical things in the playbook that could really come out of this. We are procuring goods and services, but we do want to do it in a smarter way. And going back to something that Julia mentioned at the beginning, the climate change agenda is at the forefront of everything we are doing. So I think the playbook around those two elements, I think something we're going to be working on going forward into the future.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks very much. I'm going to slip in another. We've got loads of questions from the viewers. You've been fantastic, viewers. Thank you very much indeed. And we're not going to have time to answer them all, but I'll be circulating all of your questions to the panel after the event, and any responses we get by email we'll put into the LinkedIn members group. But there is one from Adam Midgley about working with CIPS and their members on the playbook. Has any work been done with CIPS on this? So I'll put that to the panel, and when it comes round to you, panel, if you could answer if you have a view on that. But first, let's just go to Julia and ask her about how the Construction Playbook is driving change at the Development Corporation.
I would say we're kind of probably broadly aligned. My current focus is about how I demonstrate that alignment. So I guess I've always been a very strong advocate of early contractor engagement, because I think that gives us the best results, and actually it gives us an increase in pace as well. So I can clearly demonstrate across a number of projects the early contractor engagement. In some cases, the contractors will look at something, and one project I'm thinking about, they looked at it and said, but if we do it in a different way, we can knock a year and 7 months off that program. So that was pretty significant for us. For me, it's about making sure that our broader organisation understands it, and the piece I'm particularly looking at the moment is how, through our business cases, do we demonstrate that we have got compliance through the whole organisation. So that's probably the area that I'm focusing on at the moment. I would say most of the practices are there. I think with the contractors that we've got the desire to have that early collaboration and the good working relationship. We need to make sure that we've got staff at every level of the organisation who embody that as well. So I'd say those are probably the two areas I'm looking at.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because as a development corporation, you've almost got a sort of blank sheet, haven't you? You're creating a place almost from scratch. I mean, not completely from scratch, but almost from scratch. So you've got an opportunity to bring some of these values to the table really early on. Yeah. I think because we are going from scratch, you have to have a startup phase. You can't go from setting an organisation up and actually recruiting staff to spending multi-million pounds of capital in a year. That doesn't happen. We've been in existence just over 5 years. So I guess through just good project management, you could establish those practices early on.
So we don't have any, if you want, old historic ways. When people join Ebbsfleet, this is the how we do it. So there is a bit of an advantage there. But I would still say, you know, each project is so different and has so many different challenges. You have to apply the principles rather than a broad brush across it. So you have to keep using, if you want, the techniques and the principles of, well, how on earth am I going to procure this? What's the right delivery method? Who are the right people? You have to keep asking those questions. And I guess the other thing we do share is a lot of collaborative learning, not only internally but externally. Our problem is quite often we're doing things that haven't been done before. So I think we will end up quite often, I'm thinking of electricity provision, that had never been done before to kind of address the market deficit to allow developers to come forward. So we spent quite a lot of time sharing with other local authorities how to make sure you've got strategic utility provision, forward fund it, and then how to recover the money, because it is one of the key things that stops developments. So
good stuff. Thanks, Julia. Thanks a lot for that. Andrew, what's the sort of state of play for you and the construction playbook? How far down the journey are Waits?
I think, as I said earlier, I think this feels sometimes a bit like policy catching up with best practice, and we're doing a lot of these things already. The two areas I would identify was one, the research that we did, and the 51% of authorities that weren't perhaps aware, and a considerably lower number that had read and engaged with the playbook. That seems to be improving. So I think awareness among clients around the implementation is something that's big on our agenda. And the flip to that would be our sort of gap analysis that we've done in-house, looking at particularly embedding in our supply chain, tells us that there's some real work to do there. There's some key major sort of tier 2 contractors from our supply chain perspective who are pretty aware of it, but most of them are the ones that turn up to help us in the collaboration and early engagement piece, because you know, that's and they're involved in digital, or they're involved in MMC and some of the other things that it does, but the awareness elsewhere is less mature. So for us, one of our big points at the moment is to get that awareness down into our supply chain and up into our client groups.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot, Andrew. And Mark, I'm really pleased to say that the audience has found 91% of the audience has found it interesting and helpful, and the other 9% are saying they'd like to know more. So panel, you've been fantastic. Well done. Mark, how far is SCAPE down on this journey? You've already taken on a lot of what the Construction Playbook has to say, haven't you?
It is, but we've still got more to do. I mean, our arrangements are we think market leading and best practice, but obviously the Construction Playbook has raised the bar, and so it's integral to us in the future. All our future procurement arrangements to be Construction Playbook compliant. Is that a term? I'm not sure. There'll be cabinet office approval or anything like that, but we're striving for all our future frameworks to be as much as possible aligned to the Construction Playbook for the benefit of our clients.
Fantastic, Mark. Construction Playbook Compliance, CPC. That's the new buzzword, right? An appropriate one to end on. Viewers, thank you for your attention over the last hour, and we hope you found it enlightening and stimulating enough that you're going to go straight ahead and implement all the guidance in the Construction Playbook straight away. If you'd like more advice, don't hesitate to contact our friends at Waits and SCAPE and their other partners. Contact details are in the chat. But before you do that, please could you take a moment to virtually thank with me our fantastic panel for being so generous in sparing their time and sharing their insights and experience and guidance with us today. Thank you to Julia Gregory from the Ebbsfleet Development Corporation, and thank you Andrew Riggs from Waits, and thank you Sandra Roebuck from the London Borough of Lambeth, and thank you Mark Robinson at SCAPE, both for your contribution today and for SCAPE's support in making this whole series of webinars happen. That's it for A Better Way. We hope you found it useful. You can locate the videos from all of these sessions at 3fox.co.uk. Meanwhile, I'm going to be back next week on our sister channel, The Voice of Authority, interviewing the new mayor of Cambridge and Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, live on Wednesday at 11 a.m. and discussing the politics of direct delivery with councils and council housing companies on Thursday at 11 a.m. You can register for both of those sessions right now at thevoiceofauthority.co.uk. So until Wednesday, from our fantastic panel, from SCAPE, from me, and from everyone at 3Fox, thanks and good afternoon.